Donal and I do know each other. Donal is what I would call a tax planner, tax expert, tax advisor maybe sometimes as well, in terms of, in my head, by the way, tax planner, tax advisor. Tax advisor looks backwards, tax planner looks forwards and tries to avoid your taxes in the future.
Tax consultant.
Tax consultant, there's a nice summary. We would have a very professional relationship, and from time to time we've had a pint in the boar's head as well, haven't we, Donal?
We have indeed.
Yeah, okay. So, Donal, the reason why I wanted to chat to you today, we're talking about capital acquisitions tax, traditionally inheritance tax is what it would have been called. And really what I'm hoping is, I've given the listeners in the introduction there, I've given them a summary of some of the things that you can use to try and avoid it, not evade it. So you can use the €3,000 a year. Yep. You can use the family home exemption. You can use business and agri relief and favourite niece-nephew relief, okay? Is it fair to say there's not a whole pile outside of that?
No, there wouldn't. To be honest, I guess we have probably a very restrictive regime compared to other countries, and we've a very high level of taxes. I heard that you were saying that the amount of taxes that are brought in by CAT is quite high and getting higher. That's because the thresholds are so low. There's not a lot that can be done other than the ones you have set out. But I guess what I would always advise people that it's absolutely try and minimise the tax as much as you possibly can, but it's not just about the amount of tax. It's about planning for your own particular family and making sure that, I guess, assets pass on in the most efficient way and that people are protected as well. Yeah. And that, I guess, less disruption as is possible for the family, for the next generation and beyond and beyond. And
it's interesting because, like, I know I've been over and back to the States a bit this year, and one of the things that shocked me over there is and I don't expect you to have your head over this, your Irish taxes is what you talk about.
$12 million threshold.
It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And isn't that about the rich making sure that they protect their wealth and pass it on to the next generation? 12 million. But then even if you look across the UK, my understanding in the UK is the tax is on the estate. So it's on the person giving the money, whereas here the tax is on the person receiving the money.
Absolutely. And in the UK, it comes out of the estate. So it comes to you after taxes. So what you get, you get.
Yeah, which seems less painful even if the tax take is higher or the same.
Yes, it's
as the recipient it feels
less exactly.
Painful.
Yeah, it's probably... Yeah, less painful, and I guess there's less of a risk to the recipient as well because, I mean, I suppose the vast majority of us in this country, we pay PAYE and all our taxes are taken care of. And inheritance, either giving or receiving, is probably one of the biggest tax-based transactions we'll ever do. Yet 71% of the country doesn't have a will.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not something we plan for, and it's not something that we're equipped for, and it's not something that we're going to be in the headspace for, certainly if it's an inheritance. And, you know, money is probably at the last thing in people's minds when somebody a loved one has passed and so on. So, yeah, there's loads of pitfalls from a practical perspective.
Do you see any, like, I mentioned in my intro that we were up at $500,000, we went down to 200, we're up at 335 now. And when you're having teas and coffees with your tax consultant friends, is there any talk or movement or suggestion that 335 is going north at any stage?
I don't think so. It was, I think Enda Kenny promised to have it back up to the $500,000 level by the end of his term. Whenever that went, was whatever many years ago.
Yeah.
I think, and it's a serious issue because, I mean, you mentioned in your intro the dwelling exemption. It's actually quite difficult to get now. It used to be a lot easier, and we might get into it in a minute. But I mean, the tax-free thresholds are always based really on your average property price. And as you said, it got up to $500,000 plus. But also remember the rate was 20% at the time, or 22%. Now it's dropped way back down, and the rate's at 33%.
Yeah.
So, it's being squeezed from both ends, and there doesn't appear to be a political appetite for it, unfortunately. Because while it does bring in a lot of money compared to PAYE or VAT, it's irrelevant. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean. And with all these things, if you encouraged people by lower rates and higher thresholds to pass on a business or a farm or assets sooner, pay a bit of tax, people don't mind it. It's people start to hold on to things because they don't want to, I suppose, crystallise this massive tax bill. So I wish there was more of an appetite, but in the short term, I don't see it.
It's also not going to win any votes.
No, it's not. It's not the best vote getter to say, well, would you not let the man on the hill keep a little bit more of his estate?
Yeah. One of the questions I get asked all the time is, okay, so my mum and dad gave me 50 grand when I bought my house. How is anyone ever going to know that? Now, my answer to that, and I want you to correct me here, my answer to that is at some stage, your mum and dad will have passed away. You'll be sitting in a solicitor's office, and that solicitor is going to have to satisfy themselves that you have got nothing out of the 335.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as that?
It is, I guess, and I suppose every single inheritance tax form as well will have the question on it that have you received prior gifts or inheritances from someone in that group, be it A, B or C as the case may be. And I guess, so if you're ever going to get something that will tip you over, you're going to have to ask or answer a form on a statutory legislative form to say you either did or you didn't.
Okay, so you might get away with it. If that's what you're thinking, you might get away with it, but the penalties are so high for telling lies that you shouldn't even try.
I wouldn't go next nigher near it, yeah. And I suppose I always say to this people as well, you have to get away with it all the time. They only have to catch you once.
Yeah, fair. But the other thing is we do have to accept there's a digital transaction. There's a record of everything we do. And at some stage someone can just, and that's one of the other things is kind of, if you want to say unfair, or maybe as a taxpayer, we want to collect as much taxes as we can. It's best for society and that's what it is. But some people would see it as unfair. Revenue can go back as far as they want. We can go back and do tax returns over 4 years, but they can go back as far as they want where they have merit that they need
where
to go
they
back.
think there's fraud or negligence or somebody is telling fibs. There's no end point.
And the penalties are high?
The penalties for all, I suppose, evasions or avoidance of tax starts at 100%, and then you can mitigate them back down. I'd say the best you could do would be mitigate back down to maybe a 30% in a scenario where you've been really caught with your hand in the cookie jar. The interest then is the bigger issue because the interest rolls at about 8% per year and there's no mitigation of that.
So it's often not the tax that you didn't pay, it's the interest and penalties that really catch you out.
Yeah, because if you ever have far too much time on your hands and you're reading the quarterly reports as to, the tax defaulters, and if you look at the tax might be 25-30% of it.
Right. I think the message is, as a society, we want people to pay their taxes and do it the way they need to do it. But as an individual, you just don't need this headache. Like, you're just creating massive problems for yourself.
100%, yeah.
And I'm sure you sometimes get a new client on board and they're saying, can you fix this for me? And it's a nightmare for you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the family home. So it is an exemption, and I explained in my intro that I would be worried that the revenue don't want to throw you out of your house to pay a tax bill if it's the only home that you have. It used to be a thing, and it's not anymore, I believe, that you could buy little Johnny a house, stick him in it for 3 years, and then just give it to him.
Correct.
And that's closed off completely, and there would have been no tax problems there, just closed off. Or little Johnny's in his house, and you just buy it off and give him back to him 3 years later, or whatever the case may be. Now, the only way of getting that was under the family home exemption that little Johnny was being exempt from that.
And they pulled the rug out from that about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, maybe.
So now, forget about as a child, because if you're a child and this is your family home and you don't inherit any other house at the same time as your parents' death, you will be exempt. Okay?
Yep.
But as an adult, what circumstances can you inherit the family home and get the exemption?
Well, and that inherit is the probably important word, because the scenario you set out previously, it was excellent because it was it could be a gift. You could plan for it as part of your your overall succession plan. But now it's limited to inheritances only. So obviously after death. And it's only available where both the person who has passed away used the house as their main home, or the person who's in receipt of it used the same house as their main home. They have to have done so for at least 3 years up to the date of the person's passing, and there has to be no other residential property either owned by the person receiving it or inherited at any stage.
Okay.
From the deceased, and where that at any stage came in a couple of years after the main changes.
Right, okay.
Because you could say, let's say if there was a small holiday home, you'd stick that over there in a vehicle called a trust for a couple of years. You'd inherit the main home because it's a point in time, and then you could take the holiday home out, but that's gone now as well. So it's very much to people who lived in the same house and had essentially nothing. It's now almost actually, sorry to cut. It's like you were saying. It's a mechanism to not have to sell the home as opposed to an exemption.
Yes. Okay, that's fair. Would you have to never have left the home, or can you move back into the home? Mum and dad aren't well, and you're looking at them down the line. They're going to go in the next 3 years. I'm going to move back into the gaff.
It's 3 years up to the date of the inheritance.
Okay. And my understanding is if they've a care need, that's justification for you to move back into the house. Can a care need be just they're over the age of 75? They're not specifically ill.
Yeah, it's you don't actually. I mean, you can move back into the house for any reason.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be a care need.
Correct.
So you can move back into the house, provided you don't own a home. And one of the things that you and I have worked sometimes together is we're saying, okay, if you've got the family home and it's been inherited, and you do qualify as, I know the exemption is the wrong word, but you do qualify that the revenue don't want you to have to sell this to pay the tax bill because this is your home, right? Mm-hmm. You've ticked all the boxes there. But if Mammy or Daddy give little Johnny a holiday home at the same time as the inheritance, that's going to the exemption is gone, right? So you're much better off giving little Johnny's siblings the investment properties or the holiday homes,
correct, yeah.
And you just keep yourself out of the loop on that.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I guess it really highlights the need to plan, because I suppose a will is somebody's statement as that this is what I want to happen when I pass. If you don't have one, there are very straightforward but strict rules to say that if you die without a will, this is what we're going to do. And it's essentially everybody gets an equal slice.
Okay.
So in that scenario, everybody loses in a way.
Okay. Now, business relief, as opposed to a family home relief, business relief can happen during your lifetime. You can control it while you're still alive. You want to pass the business down to the next generation, and you can do it. What type of incentives are available there to pass the business down to the next generation?
Well, and there has been sort of some mooted changes to thresholds and so on in the most recent budget, but they're not in play yet. But essentially, if you pass an active business, a trading business generally, quite often, I suppose, in a company with shares and maybe with underlying assets in it, but you can get the value reduced by 90% of the actual value, so that the recipient will only pay on 10% of the value.
So the business is worth relief. £1 million, and it's passed to me. My mother gives me this business, it's passed to me. Mm-hmm. Revenue only see me as receiving 100,000, and they tax me accordingly on that 100,000, not on the €1 million. 90% reduction.
Correct.
Okay. Same with farm?
Same with farm, yes.
Okay.
Obviously, totally different qualifying conditions and so on.
Do you have to farm it?
You don't have to farm it per se, but it's there are two aspects that you have to. There's an asset value test. In other words, 80% at least of your assets have to be agricultural assets. Yeah. And either you farm it actively for more than 50% of the time, or you lease it for a minimum of 6 years to a farmer who is going to farm it.
And it's 80% of your wealth has to be farm, not that farm. It just
including that farm.
Including that farm.
So once they say, so if you already have an asset.
So if you have a farm and Dad leaves you the farm,
you're amalgamating the two.
That's fine.
Now, again, that is something, because 80% is not that much, particularly if you aren't living on the farm, if you have a family home elsewhere, you know. So, and that again is why planning is very useful, because you can move assets around within. Certainly, if you're married, you can move things around. So again, both business asset relief and agricultural relief are something that are possible to be done both by gift or inheritance. Obviously, where possible, by gift, because you can get your ducks in a row.
Yeah. Okay. Favourite niece and nephew relief? Just explain that to me.
Well, you mentioned in your intro the various thresholds, and obviously there's night and day difference between a Group A threshold and a Group B threshold. A niece or nephew is a Group B relative.
32,500 is what they can inherit. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So essentially, it's that where the niece or nephew works in the business, and let's say I own the business and my nephew works in it, and I want to pass some of it onto him. And once he has worked, I think it's 5 years, they have to work in the business with me for a minimum of 24, 25 hours a week, something like that. In other words, be a sort of a proper working active member of the business, then they can be treated as a child.
Okay.
So they can get Group B just in respect of a qualifying transfer. So I guess then if you think about it, if business asset relief works as well at the same time, you mentioned like a business worth $1 million. If you had no nephew relief and no business asset relief, that's going to crucify that nephew. Yes. But in this scenario, let's say you can get it down to just 100, and if he's treated as a child for it, then he's way below the Group A threshold.
Right. Okay.
You know, so it's more getting them into the Group A in respect of that transfer. But don't forget as well that if you can structure that, another relief can apply as well to double up.
Is there much of a difference between business relief and agri relief when it comes to favourite niece nephew?
Not really, no.
Okay.
I mean,
it's
the impact would be the exact same, I guess. Both then having to get the farmer test satisfied as well.
Have you any you know the way we all, like whenever I was doing my tax exams, and I've done a few tax exams over the years, when I was doing the tax exams, there was always the thing about uniforms and the barrister who tried to claim for their uniform and they weren't allowed to claim it as a relief. And the barrister said, well, I wouldn't wear this to the pub. And they said, well, you still can't claim it as a tax relief. Is there any inheritance tax stories that go round at the Christmas party of the tax consultants that you kind of, it doesn't have to be your case, it's better if it's not your case, but is there any of those ones on the inheritance side where someone got caught out really bad?
Well, it sounds like a lonely enough party, to be honest, but I guess it's a lot of the time it's more that people meet someone like myself or yourself and they get their plan in place and they forget that with an awful lot of these reliefs there's clawbacks.
Yes.
The main home one, you have to use the main home for as your main home for 6 years, and a lot of people say, well, as long as I don't sell it, I'm fine. But you have people who don't think 2 steps outside the box, and then let's say they've put their home up on Daft.
Yeah.
And as you say, I mean, there's a digital trail to nearly everything. You can hardly cross the road without using a PPS number anymore. These things are quite straightforward to find out. So things like, I have seen people having their main home exemption taken back because they moved to Spain 3 years later and they rented their house out. It's like,
right.
You know, things like that. Or
sorry, and just on that, for the the family home relief to apply, you've ticked all the boxes, it applies, you've inherited the house because they have died and they've given it to you, and you've ticked all the boxes, you didn't pay tax on it, you have to live in it for 6 years.
Correct.
Okay. Can you sell it and buy another home for yourself?
You can.
Okay. So you don't have to live in that house, but you have to use the proceeds of that. Okay.
And let's say if you use all the proceeds, that's great. And I think you have to, for 6 of the following 7 years, if you sell a house, so they give you a bit of wiggle to sell one and buy one.
Okay.
And then it's proportional. So if you only invest half it into your new home, you have a clawback of half.
Okay, but if you stick it up on Daft for rent because you're living in Spain, you're going to have
it's that you have to use that home as your main home for 6 years, and then there's a caveat: if you sell it, you need to reinvest.
And when you get hit with that, it's the tax plus the interest plus penalties, like we were talking earlier on.
Yeah, in a scenario like that, they probably wouldn't charge penalties because I guess you were entitled at the time, but they would charge interest. Yes. Okay, I probably should have mentioned as well that there are some rare but important occasions where the main home exemption still applies in a gift if it's been gifted by someone who has capacity issues or is incapacitated and isn't able to earn. So in some scenarios, it is still possible for a parent to transfer. Let's say I had a client who had multiple sclerosis, so they weren't able. They were perfectly compos mentis and capable, but it's just they weren't able to work to earn. So in that scenario, they're deemed incapacitated.
And so there's exemptions apply there. Okay.
But, which is again important when planning, but only I suppose if there was an issue there already.
Slightly off topic, but I'm using it as an anchor to bring you back in for something else. One of the things that frustrates me is the tax system does not treat cohabiting couples the same way it treats married couples. Okay, and that's probably for another day, and we can probably bring it back in and talk to you about that another day.
It's a massive issue. Yeah.
Massive issue. Is there any recognition here for the more dynamic family, right? I recouple up and this is my stepson or my stepdaughter or this is my foster child. Is there any recognition from an inheritance tax point of view that has kind of come of age with the times?
It has a bit. We're slow. I mean, all our legislation is probably founded in the Constitution and real old style sort of devil era politics where the family unit, as in the very sort of traditional family unit, was the basis of everything. Over the last probably 15 or 20 years, it certainly has come on. You mentioned cohabiting couples. They can, bizarrely, the first thing that brought in for cohabiting couples was that if they split up, they could be treated as if it was like a divorce and for transfer of assets. But there are certain circumstances, all right, from I don't think from a gifting perspective, but certainly from an inheritance perspective, you have to apply for it and you have to prove that you are cohabiting, and they have some sort of very sort of poorly phrased and very taxman
Like did you just get on with each other for long enough?
In a loving and committed relationship, I think is one of the legislative phrases used, which I'm not sure anyone put any thought into. But so it is possible for children. An adopted child is treated the exact same as a biological child. In an awful lot of cases, stepchildren are as well. You mentioned foster children. That's a sort of a funny one, insofar as there are two types. There's formally fostered and sort of informally fostered. A formally fostered child can be treated as a child, but in respect of inheritances only.
Right, okay.
Not gifts. And if a child has been living with foster parents, be it formally or informally fostered, they have to be living with them for at least 5 years up until the day they're 18.
Okay.
And in that case, then they can, if you could, but again, you have to prove it. And let's say you can, they can be treated as a child for gifts and inheritances. But there is that time of 5 years.
Is it specifically to age 18?
Yes.
So if you had your favourite foster parents that you lived with from the age of 7 to 15 and then it changed around, that's out the window. You moved up to another family from 15 to 18. Are you out the window then?
Not for the first family. So they can still treat you as a child because you're 5 years there.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
But let's say if you were in and out of loads of different foster families and then settled when you're 14.
Yeah, it's too late for the tax man.
So
isn't that great?
I mean, I can understand the requirement to have a time period in there, you know, but at the same time, you'd be accumulating people who can be treated as a parent to you. You don't get extra thresholds. You know, I mean, it's punishing those who probably are in a more difficult situation rather than helping them. Yeah. You know, so again, it's someone is only looking at it from one side of the fence, unfortunately. Very, very important to be planning and talk to people in a scenario like that.
Absolutely. One of the things is this is a complex area. Talking and getting advice is key to this. And it's one of those areas where people say, like, you cannot pay enough money for good advice in a situation like this. Like, that's what it comes down to for me. What 2023 taught people who watched the Late Late Show over the last couple of weeks or who watched social media at the start of the year is, now, whatever about married couples and then cohabiting couples, what does the tax man think of triples and polyamorous relationships? Donal.
I'm not quite sure they are. I don't think the David Hayes clause is up there just yet. I'm not sure how politically useful that's going to be either.
I love the awkwardness of you. It's deadly. Donal, thank you very much for coming in. I know it's been a rough couple of months in terms of work. You had the tax deadline last week. I really appreciate
that question.
That triple question to throw in there for you. Thanks very much for coming in. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.